All right, good morning, Noah. Thank you
Good
for
morning.
taking the time today to do this lovely interview with us. Noah Nusinow is the name, correct? Did I spell
Yes,
this properly or not butcher your
close enough.
name?
Close enough.
With close enough, but with Artist Road, you're the CFO and CEO there, right? And
COO and CFO. Yeah, COO and CFO. Yeah.
COO and CFO.
Yes.
Two C's, the two important
Two.
C's, I would say. We want those. Those are the ones we want.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
thank you for taking the time this morning to do this with me. As you know, I work in educating people in entertainment finance at UCLA, and it's always great to have people here with us where we record these interviews for the modules that can talk about what they do every day and what they do in the industry. And it's so amazing for students then to see these videos and learn from actual people in the road, in your case literally Artist Road, and doing this industry every day and dealing with it every day, as I say. So when we dive into, I'm always curious when I talk to people what inspired them to work in the entertainment industry. It's not an obvious career choice. I don't think, many people wake up one day and say, I want to be a producer. I didn't. I mean, there are
Yeah.
some,
Yeah.
but sometimes we kind of stumble into it. But there are, things that inspire. So for you personally, what inspired you to work in the entertainment industry?
It's a great question. I think, for me, growing up, my dad has been working in product placement for 30 years.
Wow.
And so growing up, we were always kind of having, entertainment kind of around the house. And he's represented Coca-Cola for like 30 years. They've always had a third party do their product placement, and he has a great relationship with them. And so I think, we've always watched TV and movies and whatnot. And when I was in college, I ended up going to work at his office for a bit. I needed a summer job, and basically my job was to just read scripts and find out where there were going to be placements for products they represented, whether it be Coca-Cola or whatever other brands they had at the time. And so I read just, hundreds of scripts over the summer, and watched a bunch of TV shows and movies to kind of, basically they would obviously find out where the placements were. They would take screenshots or videos and obviously share them back with the brands to kind of show. And so I think that was kind of the start of it. And right around that time, I had gotten really into some cable network shows that were kind of in the early phase. So like you think about like The Shield on FX, was like the first like big television show that I had really I binge watched it back in the day. I got all the DVDs and did the whole thing. So, it's kind of just been part of, I guess, my family's DNA. My brother is over at Disney, so he's been doing it a bit longer than I have. But, I think when I came out of college, I started at PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accounting firm. And, for me, I started not doing entertainment in accounting, and then I switched over to kind of their M&A, consulting practice. And as soon as I switched over, I had asked, hey, can I work on, any sort of entertainment stuff? And at the time, we were doing different types of work then than what I did towards the end of my time there. But, I started working and getting a little bit of insight into some of these, bigger entertainment deals back when Disney bought Lucasfilm and Marvel and whatnot. So kind of getting, cutting my teeth, understanding how those deals came together. But yeah, in terms of how I got into it, it was kind of just, I guess, in my DNA. And when I had the chance to kind of dive in, I tried to take that opportunity, and that's kind of how it started.
So is your family still in product placement?
Yeah, my dad's still doing it. He's still doing it to this day. Yeah. Yeah.
I might give you a call. So that's actually is very practical. I mean, are we talking about, in this case, I'm just going to divert a little bit because it's an interesting subject matter. Are they doing product placement as product placement, or also integration? Like when when as you said, you read the script, do you work with producers in kind of changing certain things about a character so the product is represented the way you want to? Is that something that is included, or is it just full in front of you?
So different brands do different ways. Coca-Cola, because of obviously the global nature of the brand and the history of it, generally speaking, my dad's involvement with them is more on the just product placement, really good relationships with prop masters, because that's how a lot of it happens, in that nature. If it becomes a larger integration, it kind of gets kicked up to like the marketing department. Now, there are other companies that do product placement that get more involved with the integration, maybe part of it. But at least my dad's company has really been more, hey, we have great relationship with prop masters. We try to find opportunities to include Coke where it makes sense. If it gets to kind of something bigger, like those full integration deals, then it kind of gets kicked up the ladder, I would say.
The marketing department.
Yeah,
And so
Coke is
integration is
very
providing
specific,
the product.
Yeah, and Coke will not be in any horror movie, as an example, right? They're very, very brand focused. Yeah.
No horror, and they do TV though? They're in TV and film, right? Am I wrong about this? Correct.
They and like a lot of when sitcoms were more prevalent than they are today, having a Coca-Cola can in Big Bang Theory with the amount of viewers they had was quite valuable when you think about it.
Of course. So do they just provide product then, or do they also provide money?
It depends on the brand. I mean, Coke has historically not done a lot of money deals because, again, they're just so big. But I think Pepsi might. So it's totally brand dependent in my experience. But for them, it's really more product than money necessarily.
All right. Sorry for the slight detour here, but
it's an interesting part of this one
because it's very hard to find.
Yeah, a lot of independent producers. I mean, we all think about product placement as a source of financing, right? So.
Correct, we do. And it is not always easy to find a good partner to do that with. I mean, we've had situations, and I've been in the industry for a few decades, where I hired a company to actually focus on this and paid them up front, and they didn't turn up with anything. And that's frustrating. And I know that some producers have the same issue. So it's not always easy to find really good companies that are really good at this. Just that's why I asked the question, because it's sometimes a bit of a tricky beast for the producers, depending on who we're talking to. Anyway, I didn't want to go the wrong direction. So when you talk about your background really is you work with your dad on reading a lot of script, which I think personally is very important, because you might have noticed that there are difference in qualities of what you're reading. So I think you get a sense for story, I think early on, which I think is a very important skill set and superpower. I really call it a superpower for producers to have, to be able to guide the piece of content in the right direction, especially in today's market where we have so much competition and really strong scripts are so important. So you were basically early on, not even knowing it, trained in reading script and looking at them going, yeah, this one's makes no sense. Anyway, we put the Coke in it, but it makes no sense. And then this one makes, this is great. So I think you got a bit of a sense of it, I assume, right?
When you definitely. And I think that was definitely that's definitely been very helpful in my current role of just being used to reading scripts and kind of understanding different elements of them. And then throughout my time at PwC, I transferred over into like this merger and acquisitions group and spent like 10 years doing these deals. And so what I got there was really more of the, how is content valued? What are film libraries worth? How do people look at them? How do people look at intellectual property? How does intellectual property get monetized through different, forms or fashions? It could be, and it's not just, hey, I have a piece of IP and I sell the rights to someone to make a movie. There's obviously a flywheel around that. And how do you actually maximize IP value? And how each company looks at it. It was a very interesting process. So I did that for, almost 8, 9, 10 years before I ended up, had a minute stop before this artist road, but met Mark, our CEO, and came here in June of 21 to be our CFO and COO, and been doing that for a couple of years. So yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about your company in a minute, but what I want to dive into is the background that you have, because it's clearly, on the one hand, creative, on the other hand, the financing side, and especially the subject matter of content, IP value, and library valuation. It's very, it seems arbitrary sometimes from an outsider point of view. So when I look at a library, and let's say I want to acquire a library as just a financier, I look at this and we're not talking about it's a Disney library or it's a Warner library. It's a library of a company that is a production company who's done what we do, independently financed, has accumulated maybe 10, 15, 20 movies over the years when they do the financing of them and the production, and now want to sell that library. In your mind, maybe there is a range that you can share what a library could be worth, and what kind of value do you arrive at when you start valuating a library? What is kind of your starting point and ending point? Can you share that?
Yeah, I think the best way that I guess in my experience has been is that, libraries themselves tend to be very high profit, assets. And that's why you see a lot of money involved in them, right? Because when you think about for every dollar I make in a library of licensing whatever 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 films or television shows, you probably are making anywhere between 60 and 80%, 60 or 80 cents on the dollar for that, depending on how, if you're self-distributing or you have a third-party distributor, and depending on how your participation waterfall and your residuals kick out, that's kind of where it is. So you think about any sort of business, really a business, because it's recurring, right? You continue to do it, you're able to earn 60 to 80 cents per dollar for every time you sell something. They tend to have quite high values. And especially as streaming came on board, obviously, as streamers came on board and started, kind of picking up kind of the lost, or at least forced the loss of the DVD sales, that life has been extended. And I think it will continue to be extended because we only are going to have more newer and newer technologies and platforms that come around. Obviously, subscription-based streaming before, and then now ad-based subscription, ad-based models are kind of the current version of the world that's growing. So in terms of valuing them, it's always just understanding kind of what these titles are and how they operate, and then also understanding kind of the decay of the library, because obviously if I license something for $1 this year, the next time I get to do it, it's not going to be $1. It'll be like 90 cents, whatever. I continue to use this analogy. So I think the decay of titles differs. It could be anywhere from, I don't know, 10 to 20%, but really good titles, like evergreen titles, they decay at a way lower rate, like 3-5%, and I think that's where
the original license fee. So when, let's say we have a Christmas movie that's an evergreen movie, that in the first run we sell, let's say we do it for, I don't know, $10 million, and then we sell it in the first run, we get, I don't know, 120% of the budget, so we get 12 million on the first run, right? And then we go into second run, third run. How does that kind of go library value wise? What is your ratio there in comparison?
In terms of the license fees, I mean, generally for us, at least when we're doing, theatrical run films, a lot of companies kind of have at least either theatrical run, you kind of your first pay window and things of that nature. A lot of people have rate cards with kind of companies, so they're kind of predetermined based on a box office result per se, right? And I think then thereafter it's just a matter of how good your distribution licensing department, and that's tough now because when we had a lot of theatrical films, there were massive distribution departments with lots of not public, but lots of available information for them to go make these deals. Yes. I think now with streaming, you're kind of doing maybe an all rights deal, and you may never get the film back. And so there's less data available for people. I think it's become a lot harder to right size license fees nowadays than it was back in the day.
Right. I mean, a lot of the films we do today still are sold in the regular license model. So even if a streamer buys them, they don't necessarily buy all rights. They buy, a certain right for a certain territory or a right for certain territories. So when we finance a movie, for example, we look at what does the international sales estimates look like from a sales agent that will distribute the distribution rights for a movie. And then the US is often a buyer that either releases it theatrical or not, but they give us a license fee. So when I calculate all that together, I come to an amount that the movie makes in the first run, right? Because these first run licenses are basically the first runs we're selling, theatrical release or not. Sometimes we have a theatrical release in the US, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we have a theatrical release in other countries and we didn't have a theatrical release in the US. So it kind of varies. But for the library tell you, because when I put these finance plans together and I have a slate deal, I always wonder, what should I value the library at? So for me, what I've done is, because one doesn't know, because there is not much information in the world, I go by the performance of the movie. So if a movie performed well in the first licensing cycles, I give them a higher library value than if they weren't doing so well, in which case, as you would call it, they decay larger. Is that am I going about this totally wrong?
No, I agree. I think it's absolutely true. everything is dependent upon, I mean, back in the day, again, everything was dependent on your box office number, right? And I think, even now, whether it's a theatrical or streaming release, there is that kind of, longevity to content that does well. So I'm same with us. And, for us, and we'll talk about the company I'm at in a little bit, but, we focus exclusively on comedies. So it's interesting, like when you look at different genres, the focus of time and effort on nailing down the numbers. For us, we spend a lot more time thinking about the US and English speaking markets because comedies don't travel as well, to non-English speaking countries. So, for us, there's less of an international play on our content and more of a domestic play. And so we end up sometimes talking about more all rights deals if that's where it goes, because for us, it's not worth the time and effort to go try to license something to a country that we know we're only going to get a little bit of money for. I'd rather have one person take everything, right? That's kind of how we think about it, at least in the comedy space right now.
That makes sense. So let's talk about your company. So Artist Road, as you mentioned, is a company that mainly focuses on, or does focus on, producing movies.
Yep, only movies.
That are comedies, only movies. You don't do TV, you don't do horror, you don't do action, you just do comedies. What is the budget range you're operating in?
So we operate, I would say, in the, we don't have an exact target, but let's call it 15 million and under. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. But when I mean under, I mean, we'll go all the way down to like 3.5. It just really depends on the project. For us, the company was started in late 2020. I joined in mid 21, and the company was formed as a joint venture between Spyglass Media Group, Propagate Content, which is big in the unscripted space, Artist First, which is a talent management company that's part of Propagate, and a company called Off-Road Productions, which is a venture that's co-owned by Todd Garner, is a big time producer, and Mark Korshak, our CEO. And I think, the idea behind it was, each of these companies obviously does some of the things you mentioned. They do television, big budget television, a ton of unscripted work. They do big budget features, horror. But the idea was, okay, let's all bring our collective, experience and knowledge and skill set to this entity that will focus solely on comedies, right? And specifically, I mean, I call them low budget, but but $15 million, it's still a good chunk of change if that's where we ended up producing. So, we do sit in the lower budget range, and that's kind of the thesis of the company, is to try to create high concept driven comedies for a price point that makes sense, to allow us to, not be beholden to just one project that does or doesn't do well, as much as you try, and that way we can profit from them and share those profits with our talent. We try to have a fairly simple back end structure that allows talent to participate. It was kind of ideate in the same way that Blumhouse did on the horror side. It's not the perfect analogy, but it's kind of the same concept of, let's create lower budget comedies and have simple waterfalls to allow our talent to participate, which allows us to maybe attract talent who would otherwise want, multi-million dollar, fees. So, yeah.
So talk about the projects you've done so far. I know the company is fairly young.
Yes.
But I know you did some.
Yeah, when I first joined, we greenlit our first movie like a month after I joined, and it was a movie called Reunion, and it's a murder mystery comedy. And so there were obviously quite a bit of those going around, like Knives Out and whatnot. And so, we had a couple pieces of talent attached, and we just decided to go make this movie, and we shot it in the summer of 2021. And went through that process in post. It's kind of our first movie, and it's going to end up, I think, going to a major streaming platform. Deal's not totally signed yet, but I think it will be, which would be great. And then we also shot our second movie last summer. It's a film called Incoming, and Incoming is based kind of a high school comedy, kind of in the world of kind of super bad. And we felt like we hadn't seen kind of hard R comedy like that in a long time. And the script was excellent. And so we decided to greenlight it basically within a month of getting the script, shot it like 5-6 months later in the summer. And that's going great. It's testing great. So we're going to take it to the market in about 3 weeks and try to sell it. But we're really excited about it. It's a really funny movie. I don't think there's been a movie like this in theaters in a while. So for us, again, the narrow focus on comedy, I think, is great in that we are able to just kind of hyper focus on that genre. When you have an executive who's reading horror, drama, comedy, whatever, like it's just inundated with different types of content. I feel for them, for our team, because we're only focused on comedy. It allows us, I think, to kind of have those comedic relationships with whether it's the agencies, talent, and we have a few other things in the pipeline. Although with the writer's strike, it's been challenging to obviously move some of those forward, but hopefully when that gets resolved, we'll be able to, dive back in on some of this development front.
Right. So comedy, I mean, first of all, I like that you do different kinds of comedy. So it looks like you're doing R, are you going down to PG or do you start at PG-13? What's kind of your sweet spot, do you think?
We haven't gone down to PG. I mean, we probably do a PG-13 movie. The nature of our group and partners is they've typically done kind of R-rated comedies. That can be rom-coms too, by the way. So I guess that could go down to PG-13. So we would do a rom-com. We've had rom-coms we've looked at. So it really kind of varies. I think, when we had looked at the industry, we had taken a look maybe 6 months ago at what I would define as like the comedy film streaming landscape. We didn't focus much on films because, comedy films in theaters have really disappeared, unfortunately. We would like that to come back.
I was just about to go there. I was just about to ask, why?
I don't know. I mean, it's a bummer because I think people really like when we've tested our movies, to get into a theater with an audience and collectively laugh, it's a totally different experience than sitting on your couch and watching something. Like laughter is infectious, and I think that there's something missing there. Like if you actually look back to like 2013, like roughly 20% of all theatrical movies were comedies, just by count, and it represented like 18% of the total box office. Today, like last year in 2022, it represented about 11% of total theatrical films released, and only represented about 3% of the box office. So it's like there are comedy movies going out there, but they're not getting the traction they used to. And, that has to do with a variety of reasons. And one of them is that a lot of these are now ending up on streaming. And so we're not getting the same level of interest in getting back into theaters. Now, there have been some successes, like Cocaine Bear that came out this year was a great success that we look at and say, okay, there's a hard R concept-driven comedy. And we're hoping that continues. So,
what you're seeing, just to quickly touch on this. So what you're seeing is the percentage goes down of comedies in the theaters are being released, but the percentage in relation to the audience watching them goes down too. Well, the reason for that could be they don't have enough time to be seen, so they go into the theater, out of the theater, or is it that people don't want to see them? Is that something? I doubt it, but
because it's if you look at also, there's been like studies done in terms of like the genres that people most want to see in film and television. The number one genre every time, comedy. People want to laugh when they go to see movies. I think that after kind of the main part of COVID had come through, I think people had determined, what, I'd rather just stay home and watch the comedies, and I'll go to the theaters to watch my big blockbusters. I think that's starting to change a little bit, but it's going to take some time to get people to go back. I think we need to have that kind of zeitgeisty type of comedy where like, oh, I have to go see that movie. That looks so funny. Like I remember when I saw the trailer for Hangover, I was like, oh my God, I have to go see that movie in theaters. And it obviously did really, really well. So I think,
and I do think when you look at that kind of movie, I think you're in a right vein when you go the R-rated area, because I do think that genre, R-rated comedy, would potentially do very well in the theaters, as well as maybe, we call it the date movies, but the rom-coms. Do you think the rom-coms are still a potential for theatrical audience?
Totally. I think rom-coms are there, but what's interesting, I think, is if you look at comedies as a between theatrical and streaming, because streaming only really kind of, and I'm talking about original streaming, right? Streaming only happened in 2015, was Netflix kind of started doing the originals. Nowadays, the same amount of comedies on a count basis essentially are being made, like around 18-19% of all films either in theaters or on streaming originals are comedies. And the 11% now is in theaters. The rest is on streaming. So what's happened is if you see a graph of this, it literally looks like this disappearance of comedies. But what's really happening is they're all going to streaming because you for a variety of reasons. One is I think you're not subject to comedies are very execution dependent. Not everyone finds everything funny. You hope to find something that a lot of people find funny. And the risk of a comedy is far less on streaming, because as a producer, you're probably already getting paid. Your production costs are getting paid. So there's less kind of outcome risk from a streaming movie. So I think that that's part of it. And I think that, you see that in the rom-coms, holiday movies, a lot of these things kind of ended up now on streaming, and they do well, and they have audiences, but they're not in theaters. And I think that really for the industry to be successful, movies have to go into theaters, because again, if you look at like the profit pool for the industry, without theaters, it really becomes a challenge. And I think that's where we are really of the belief that, we got to find a way to get people back in the theaters, and it's on the onus is on the creative group to obviously provide something that people want to go see too. So it's trying to shift people back into that theatrical mindset.
So the ideal project for you, talking about execution driven, would be obviously first of all, a strong script, that's a given, but would you then want to work with directors who are proven in that genre?
It's super, we were talking about this before, and it's super interesting around, whether the first route for a script is a director or cast. I think in our experience, it's definitely been both. There's not one way or the other. Scripts sometimes come in with a writer who also wants to direct, right? So there's not always, there's many different paths. What's interesting is like to get, someone to perhaps buy the project down the road. My guess is that talent might be a route where, I have someone who wants to do this project. Someone else really likes that person. Great. That's, good sell. But when you think about it from a producer point of view and execution, to get the movie to be the best it possibly can be, the director is so critical. So it's like, it's almost, you obviously need both, but
I was going to talent in a minute, but because you mentioned execution driven. I mean, the execution, yes, of course it has to, talent is essential. We know, but the director, especially from a timing, because comedy is all about timing, 100%. And it's all about performance, not trying too hard, not being on the nose. I mean, there's so many different things that a director need to look at when they do comedy. I think comedy is difficult to direct, honestly. I think it's much easier to direct a thriller, action, horror, because comedy is just hard to direct. So that's why I was like, okay,
totally.
Director wise, is that, are you looking? Is it, you're probably not going to use first-time director, is the question I'm asking, I guess.
No, we have actually. We definitely gone with. They've been writer directors. We have. I think to your point though. When you think about this from the script to the end product. Comedies definitely are more execution dependent. Like it has to be funny on the page.
Yes.
You have to have with talent. It's obviously great to have the best available talent, the most marketable talent, obviously. But a lot of talent, whether they've done dramas their whole life, they're actually quite funny people. So like they can really transfer, I think, to comedy well. But I think the director and especially in comedy is the editor is critical. Like the picture editor is someone who, is a very, very involved to your point in the timing and the shifts and everything like that. And then being able to identify things that we thought would work and we watch them and they don't work. And so how do we incorporate ADR lines that can help elevate the movie? How can we shift the storyline? So, I mean, to me, also editors in the comedy space, maybe even have a heightened role because of the timing and the execution, for sure.
So for sure. Yeah, no, I think this is definitely a genre that happens in the editing room. I would totally agree with you because of the pacing of it. And that's true. So when people come to you, I don't know if you take scripts from outside parties. I mean, you're with Propagate, you have sources within your own company where you can, get the creative material, get the scripts. Are you looking for outside sources as well to send you scripts? Is that something that is possible with your company, or how do you get your material?
Yeah, so Mark, our CEO, and Julia, who's our creative executive, they have great relationships at the agencies and around town. And so we typically, they typically get a lot of scripts through the agencies or through, attorneys we know. We don't take any kind of unsolicited just person sending, but through attorneys and through agencies, we definitely receive quite a few scripts. And then to your point, because we have 3 or 4 partners, they all are getting scripts. And oftentimes, it might not be right for them. It might just, okay, we're not going to do a $5 or $10 million comedy. So let's see if Artist Row will do it. So we have a great funnel, I would say, of content, whether it's through our partners or through Mark and Julia's relationships. We do see, I think, a tremendous amount of comedy scripts. So yeah, absolutely. We definitely always, read through them and try to see if there's any that would make sense. And so we have, when obviously when there's not a strike, we have bi-monthly development calls and making sure we're going through all the scripts and we have people reading them. And the great thing about the partner groups is not only the partners that we have who have great relationships and networks, it's also, they have entire teams. So we can always have their teams, read a script and say, hey, what did you think about this? So getting more consensus built around a project, which I think is helpful.
So if someone would come to you, like a production company would come to you with a script and cast attached and a director, so basically a package. Is that something you look at?
Yeah, absolutely. We've gotten packages
it's
before.
not one of the people, let's say if I stumble over something and we package it as a production company, so I could send it to you and then you would look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. We would look at it, and if it's something we would share with the partner group, and if it's something we wanted to do, we would go ahead and potentially finance it and go ahead and do it. In the past, we've definitely kind of made our projects and then sold them, which I think is a great way to get a company off the ground. Obviously in the future, we'll want to continue to do that selectively and also try to find distribution partners. But yeah, absolutely. We've definitely received packages with people attached and everything. I would say not rarely, but I would say we definitely receive that in different phases too. They might have one attachment and a director and a producer. We definitely, and on both of our movies, we've worked with third-party producers. So it's not just us, right? We do have producing partners. Yeah, right. Who've been great. So yeah.
So the project comes to you as a script, maybe with a talent attached or a director, and then you would either pack it. Let's say it comes from a channel like an outside producer. You would then package it with them, looking at cast and work with your agency contacts to make offers. How do you usually work in getting the talent on board?
I mean, I think it depends on the level of talent. Like obviously, when Mark and Julia kind of get something in the door and we share with our partner group, oftentimes, making lots of lists. That's something a lot of people do in the creative world, making lots of lists. And finding who might be good for the role. And obviously I think people have a tendency to try to take big swings first, right? Hey, maybe we can find someone who just really engages with the project, wants to do it. Maybe we shot both of our films in Los Angeles, so maybe there's an opportunity because someone's going to be here or lives here, wants to go home to their own bed at night. There's some things that we can offer that I think are attractive. And if they don't, then we continue to go through the list. And again, the bigger talent typically isn't going to read something without an offer attached. That's just my understanding experience. And then other people will read it, but they may not engage with the project. So it's really it's quite a long process. It takes you might get lucky. The first person is like, oh, I love this, but other times it takes time, and that process kind of plays out. And you kind of, at least for us, we've typically tried to attach our main lead or two ourselves, through those relationships. And then, when you have that and you kind of greenlight, we definitely bring on a casting director, and they help really ramp up that process in terms of filling out the roles with people.
I think that's smart. And then you mentioned to me when we talked before that you actually financing the projects fully. So how do you go about deciding how much you're financing and what your profit analysis is? So how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think to date, again, we've to jumpstart the company, we've kind of self-financed with funding. So our biggest issue, like a lot of independent producers are facing right now, is really the interest rate environment, because when you borrow money, it's expensive right now. And I think that when you borrowed money in 2016, 2018, 2020, you were not paying a lot of interest. Right now we are. So that's a big factor for us, is what's our carry cost to, on the money that we're borrowing to make a film. The other pieces of it that are highly critical are tax incentives, and product placement is helpful, to be able to get maybe $100,000, $200,000 for product placement. It's a huge amount of money. So, that's a piece of it. But yeah, the tax incentives is a big piece. Our last film, we were able to secure the kind of California tax credit, which has been a great process. We were fortunate enough to be allocated money for that. So, we're always looking at tax incentive states. I mean, if we could shoot in California and get the tax credit every time, we would. We love shooting here. But obviously I've looked at everywhere from, New Mexico to Texas to Rhode Island to, we've done some stuff in New York, post-production in New York. I mean, Canada obviously is a major place. So, always looking for tax incentives when it comes to producing films. You have to find ways to mitigate your at-risk capital. So that's a huge part of it.
So talking about risk mitigation, so your one strategy risk mitigation is finding money that you don't have to pay back, such as brand integration and tax incentives. What else do you do about mitigation strategies for your own films? What do you look at?
I think for us, a very traditional mitigation strategy, which doesn't work for us as well, is the international market and the pre-sales. A lot of independent production companies, as I'm sure you do all the time, you have talent level and a travelability of a piece of content that may allow you to secure pre-sales in certain international territories. I think for us, it's very difficult to do that because, again, we're not doing the $50-100 million comedies, so we're not getting the level of talent that might attract a big pre-sale number. So for us, one of the more traditional risk mitigation strategies we aren't able to really take advantage of. Depending on the project, we will actually bring it out to the marketplace and find partners. So that's the second way we do it, is we love having partners. We think it's great, and we always want to have partners with theatrical distribution apparatuses to be able to, if the movie's that good, let's have the optionality to take it theatrically. If it's good and not out of the world, then we can certainly go down the streaming market. We can certainly piece together elements of it. But yeah, we love having theatrical partners.
So who are those theatrical partners that you would aim toward on your projects that you would like to see working with you on these?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really the traditional major studios, the Paramounts of the world, the Sonys of the world, Lionsgate too. They're a great partner. I think now what's interesting is that you have a lot of these streaming companies who are starting to develop theatrical arms.
Right. I'm asking.
Yeah, so obviously Amazon's done theatrical distribution for a while, but even Apple's doing some stuff, I believe, with Paramount now, and so and Netflix I don't think does anything really yet, but maybe in the future. I think, again, if those folks were going to get into that business more, I think they would be a more natural theatrical fit. They're great streaming fits, obviously, because they have great audience bases, but from a theatrical standpoint, it's not usually. So we're talking about the major studios, the mini majors. Again, not that many of them left, unfortunately. But
I know that's why I'm asking. Aren't there some independent distributors, and I don't even know if they exist anymore because I haven't heard, like Open Road and some of those. I don't even know if they still exist.
I don't know. There were some. There were some. Obviously MGM was one, but now they're part of Amazon. But there's not that many. I mean, there's definitely some of the more kind of the indie, distributors out there. It's not that we wouldn't necessarily work with them if that was the route. But I think, our partner group generally, at their level, they're doing stuff with the Paramounts, the world, the Disneys of the world. And so I think naturally that's our kind of first avenue, because that's where, and a lot of this is relationship dependent. Not every person at every company has a relationship with someone at a studio at the right level. And I think, for us, that's where our relationships are. That's where, our partners' relationships are. And so that's where we tend to go first, because it's much, I think, selling a film is hard enough as it is. It's a little bit easier when you know the person, I think. So I think that's why our partner group likes to go that route first, for sure.
Right. Is the focus for the company to establish a library? You mentioned earlier that you sometimes then do deals where the buyers buy all rights, which then would prevent you from building a library. So what are you thinking of the direction for the company to be? And
No, I think the idea is to build a library. You know, if we're doing an all rights deal, it's because the price point makes sense, such that, you know, the amount of money that we would receive now, or really over the next year or two, is on a present value basis more than maybe the library would be worth otherwise. So, which is why I think you typically see streaming companies pay premiums, because they're kind of buying out the kind of downstream impact of a film, particularly if it's a completed film like we've been doing. So, you know, we would like to, and we'll continue to try and build a library value. But again, if the price point makes sense, then it's just it's all math. Well, not all math, but it's like math. It's just compare, is this worth more to me now than it would be if I had the library? And a lot of times, even those all rights deals, you do retain sequel rights. So you're not prevented or precluded from making, if it's really good, you could still make a second and third movie or whatever, or TV show out of it. So a lot of times there's other rights that are involved besides just, hey, where can I show this and how long, that are part of these deals that, you know, there's no library value attached to a sequel that isn't made and written, but there is value for the ability to do that if you so want to.
Do the buyers then have first right of refusal to get the second one or the third one?
I think a lot of times, yeah. They have the ability to, a lot of times I think it's the ability to be involved with the project. You know, they kind of get first right of refusal on, hey, if we do a sequel, you can either, you know, co-fi it, or maybe, you know, maybe it is that. But I think a lot of times, because for the second film, they're already involved with the first, it's really more of a co-fi conversation. And that's kind of where that ends up going. So that, and that's pretty standard, I'd say, in terms of, you know, doing those deals.
And I mean, you're basically doing the comedy version of Jason Blum, if you want, right?
Yeah.
How do you? No, I think that's what you're doing, and I think it's beautiful that you're branding this. And I do think these kind of movies are absolutely in demand. And I think because there are none of them there, I think you actually might find that you're going to open up a whole marketplace again that we totally forgot about. How do you think you're going to impact the industry by doing what you're doing? If you think you do?
I think we're hoping to. I think it's doing it for a couple of years now, and especially, you know, we're a young company, so a lot of the first 2 years has been, you know, obviously establishing kind of like a flag in the industry and letting people know and branding who we are. You know, we have our films going to start coming out and hopefully getting good reception, but also part of it is building like the infrastructure to be able to produce them, because we do produce them as well. Like both, you know, we physically produce them as well.
You do all of it. You develop them, you package them, you finance them, you produce them, you distribute them. You're basically like a mini major studio.
Yeah, well, obviously
before giving it to the mini major studio. Yeah, I know. You do all of it, which is great.
It's you know, I think, but in building that infrastructure of, like, you know, things that people don't even think about, or, you know, hey, what do your standard contracts look like? What do you want to do in terms of, you know, payroll companies that you're going to use? How are you going to deliver films? Do you have templates to deliver films? It's, you know, we're really fortunate that we have a lot of people who've done this for a long time, so we're able to kind of lean and leverage some of their experience and create our own version of it. But I'd say also, you know, the infrastructure that goes into producing and delivering a film. You know, one, we couldn't do it ourselves. Again, partners are super helpful, but also about just building it up in a way that's sustainable. So I think we've done that. We're very comfortable in our ability to kind of, you know, get, again, to package, develop, produce, and deliver the films. And I think, you know, going forward, our hope is, you know, as hopefully these strikes are resolved, to come back and really hit the ground running and try to make more. Because we do think, again, comedy space, just like horror, like sometimes you're going to make something think is funny and you have talent and all this stuff, and sometimes it just doesn't turn out the way you want it to. Fortunately, we feel like we haven't done that yet, but, you know, I think that it is hard, and so I think it's critical to be able to produce at a little bit of a higher scale so that you can give yourself the opportunity to find that hangover, that breakout hit, right?
And I do the impact. I do think you will, you know, once you figure out the sweet spot that you will be known for, which is the brand comedy that actually works for the global audience, I think you're going to have an impact in the industry for reviving that genre. Because right now, people are really just trying left and right. And if it's not a big studio movie, I don't even see that many independent comedies coming out. So I think if you do it right, it sounds like you have all the structures in place to do it. You have the team in place to do it. It could give an impact to the industry to remind us this is a genre we forgot about, and this is a genre we should also go see in the movie theaters again. And then it becomes like, you know, the Spyglass. They had it like, it's the same with Working Title. They had it's a name for a brand that we know. When we watch one of those movies, it's going to be a good movie, no matter how you look at it.
Totally.
And that's, I think, the opportunity for you here, and the opportunity for all of us to watch you do it, to then be able to watch more of those movies in the theaters. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I hope
Do
so.
you
Yeah.
have, yeah. So let me just make sure I'm not missing anything, but I definitely want you to think about, you know, the audience for this video is a lot of people that are either expanding their career, they're already working in the entertainment industry in some form or fashion, and they're expanding it, or they're are emerging into this industry, knowing that, and knowing where we are today in the universe of the industry. What advice would you give them?
It's a great question. You know, I think, you know, for me, so again, like, because I came from kind of the merger and acquisition world, and now like dive into the 20-foot deep end into the content production world. And I think that, you know, for me, I'm very much in the details, and part of that is, you know, I'm a little bit of a fish out of water to start with. I think the best piece of advice would just be whatever project or opportunity anyone has, to just, you know, find something you don't know anything about and learn about it, because it will become useful at some point in the future. You know, obviously, you know, people will be involved in projects in different capacities. It might be the lead creative producer, it might be a co-producer who, you know, made introduction. And so I think that, you know, just getting involved in the lowest, literally like the grunt work that happens is like, you just learn so much. And, you know, like for our movies, like I was on set as much as I could be, connecting with people who would probably never really talk to me. You know, they didn't need to, but you know, making those relationships, connections, you know, helps in the long run to be able to say, okay, if we're overseeing the movie, and we're talking to the people who are on the ground, you learn a lot. There's a huge communication gap between the production entity and the studio. And even though for us, we're kind of both, they're oftentimes very separated. Just to get in there and connect with people and learn about what they're doing, you become such a better producer and everything, to be able to just, you know, make decisions. And so if I had any piece of advice, honestly, I think that is the biggest one, is just to like go meet the grip, you know, go meet the lighting technician. Like, you know, again, these are people who you'll learn a lot from, and eventually one day in the future, something will come up and you're like, you know what? I talked to this one person 3 years ago, and actually this is how it works. And you will gain more status as a knowledgeable individual if you've had those kind of relationships all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. You know, that's what I would say.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I do think there is knowledge on all levels in movie making, and the reality of it is you don't make that movie alone, ever. It's always a team. It's not just a team of producers, it's a team of 100 people on set. And knowing what they do, knowing how they're structured, knowing how the set operates, knowing the responsibilities each of these people have, by just being there and learning and being even just a fly on the wall, or if you can work in a capacity on set, I think it's hugely helpful to do anything to do and make relationships. I would totally agree with you. I think people underestimate the power of just observing and really diving into something very deeply that is not even on the surface of it the job you want to do.
Totally. I think if people are trying to become producers, again, you definitely have to know everything from the bottom up. I mean, obviously there are creative producers who don't deal with that, and that's great. They've made really great careers and whatnot. But I always find the most impressive people we work with are the people that can do all the creative all the way to the production. And those are the people that really get to the top of the mountain, I'd say. You know, those are the people who can take a creative idea and actually know how to implement it, know what it costs to do so, and gather the team to do it. I mean, that is like the best type of producer. Other producers have different roles and capacities in terms of what they're doing, whether it's creative, whether they have talent relationships, whether they have distribution, whatever it is. There's a lot of different kind of producer qualities for sure. But definitely the most impressive are the ones that can do a little bit of everything, because they really can do it all. So yeah.
Agree. I do have one more question because I wanted to talk to you about the finance structure. When you do a movie, and let's say it's not one that you sell out to, or you sell all rights either to a streamer or to a mini major, right? So let's say you have a conversation with Lionsgate about a movie, and Lionsgate says to you, I want to buy the US rights and we're going to take it out theatrically, which is probably a conversation to be had. If they make you an offer, what is normally the range that you see the US rights go for?
I gotta guess, it really depends. I mean, again, we're pretty young, so and we do rely on our parent companies to assist in the distribution. That's part of the structure of the company, is that we don't have a massive amount of overhead to carry our own distribution person, our own that kind of thing. So we do rely on them a lot to help source those deals. So I think it really depends. I mean, what you're seeing in the marketplace, like I think Theater Camp was a movie that just sold kind of in that low budget range. I think they sold it for like 8 million, but I think they might have been all rights. I don't know if it was US or not, only US. But it definitely, those numbers have definitely come down over the years, it feels like. And I think that, in the streaming world, they're still very focused, I feel like, on cast, which is totally their prerogative. They feel like that drives customer acquisition and retention. So because of their cutting back, I think that it's affected maybe some of the lower end independent type of content they may be doing. Our hope is that we all kind of get back to concept driven titles, and I think that helps, because I think that sometimes people watch stuff on whatever platform and they don't find it funny, but they watch it because there was a big name talent. Like maybe that's an okay business model, but we'd rather people go, oh, I watched this, it was amazing. Like I didn't know, I barely knew this person. He or she's an amazing actor, and it was so funny. Like that's I think where there's an opportunity. So yeah, in terms of US rights, it really depends. I mean, even for us, trying to take a film that we have to go find a theatrical partner, it's not even gonna be, we're looking for someone hopefully to take it, have a global distribution apparatus, right? We want someone to take it everywhere. So I don't have a good answer for that, honestly.
I was just curious. Because for the comedy genre, it's hard to figure out when I do finance plans, what should I actually project for the US? That's why I was going with this, because it's, as you say, pretty much all over the place. I mean, I know it for, my normal genres, which is the thriller, the action. I know it for those, like, because I've done those deals. But comedy is not a genre that I've been very active in. So I was just curious to see how that financially would look like if I put a finance plan together, what one should even put in for the US. Could be 0, could be 50%, could be 120%. I mean, when you look at the deals that are being done in the trades, it's all over the map. That's why I was wondering if you had a more insight in that.
Totally. I mean, I think that, for the, the US stuff, at least, I mean, in the comedy space, again, because it's so cast, right now it feels very cast driven. So a lot of them are being bought up, people are paying, 120, 125, whatever it is, of budget for these major features with big name talent. I think when there's not big name talent, I think that studios and streamers have a tendency to wait till it's done. It's not that you can't find any kind of pre-sale financing in the US, but I think that it's very much a let me see it when it's done. And if it's really good, they'll give you a bunch of money for it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a being.
Yeah, they give you a bunch of money. That's exactly what I'm seeing. And it's hard. And so pre-sales, I understand, is very hard to do with comedy. I totally get it. And only if you have cast, you can maybe get some. But for then what they're paying when they see it, it could be all over the map. It could be a lot of money. When I gave the class the other day, I think we talked about Coda, which I always get weird information. Someone said it was made for 6 million. The other person said it was made for 10 million. Someone said it sold for 25 million to Apple. So it's all over the map, but it's definitely a lot of money that's being paid for this kind of movie. That is, I don't think it's blend of comedy. It's like just a heartfelt family movie that has comedic aspects in it, maybe. But totally. The deals are all over the place. So that's what I meant by that for those kind of movies. It's hard to predict them. And you know how it is when you work with investors, or maybe you don't. I have to always predict stuff, and I have to figure out how do I get my predictions supported you know, obviously I go by what, you know, the deals I'm making and what we have been making over the last 20 years. But if it's a certain genre, like this genre, the comedy genre, it's just harder to predict. It's harder to project.
It is
What I'm
definitely.
finding.
Yeah, and again, because they've lost, like, because the comedies are not in theaters as much as they used to be, we're losing a lot of information, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, 10 years ago, you could reasonably assume a certain range of outcomes for a US based comedy, because there were a bunch of comedies out there. They're all making money in the box office. Now that we're in the streaming world, again, a lot of that information is not available. People have relationships and can try and find information that might be out there, but it's much harder for sure. It's more, you know, gut feel. Hey, we think that this script is really funny. We really like the cast we can get for it. We believe in the director. Let's go make it, you know. And then you obviously try to convince someone else of the same thing. Like, obviously, if we can, you know, find a studio partner ahead of time who also believes in the project like we do, there you go. You know, they'll put in half, we'll put in half, and we'll go make the movie. That's part of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good strategy if you can make that happen. Well, Noah, you've been a well of knowledge, and I'm so appreciative for you to share all these amazing things with us. And I'm glad we did this, because you're the first one I could actually talk comedy. I've never even met anyone who focuses on this genre, which is so fascinating. So I really appreciate you taking the time. Do you have any last words?
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And let's definitely stay in touch. So
We'll stay in touch for sure. Have a great day.
you too. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.